everything's happening at the now, but because we're chest deep inside time, we also have more than one truth going on at the same time. So that's what I call multidimensional. Multidimensional can sound very airy. It could sound like a word that you fill in a place when you don't know Jack from Joe. But to me, it gets really multidimensional, especially when for my job is to describe things that are not only one truth. And so because of that, what we could look at is like almost the highest truth for the sake of highest at this moment would be that there's no time, but then that should not negate the lower truths. So when we really evolve, we are not pitting truths against one another. We are simply navigating that there are larger, more eternal truths and then temporal, and then using those, like harnessing one to paradoxically evolve higher than it, rather than pitting them, because that's just the cognitive dissonance of confusion. Have you ever heard that saying? I love it. I get railed every time we share it, and I still don't care because I love it. It is that, it's that the mystic swims in the same waters that the psychotic drowns. Joseph Campbell.
To a Broaderlands podcast. The opinions expressed on Broaderlands podcasts are those of the guest speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of the host or Broaderlands podcast. Sarah, welcome to Broaderlands podcast. What an honor to have you back on.
Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, thank you. And we're here to talk about your new album that's coming out.
Yeah, it's fire. It's called The Timeline Split.
With the B word after that.
I know, I would like stop, like hold it back.
We were talking off air, and I was saying, I would love for you to touch on the difference between the soul and the spirit, and throw in the psyche connection with that as well, if you don't mind. I love talking to you. You're like my favorite spiritual, esoteric, et cetera, teacher these days. I love listening and learning from you. So it's an honor to have you on.
Oh, thank you so much, because I saw this meme about 2 years ago now, but it's like been imprinted in my head. Have you ever seen the Grand Theft Auto chick? I didn't know who she was. My brother had to tell me. I just saw this hilarious meme of this like Grand Theft Auto chick in a pink dress in a sewer. And she said, "I have to be the most esoteric bee in this sewer." She's literally just in a sewer. And so when somebody tells me that I'm their favorite esotericist, I'm like, well, thank you. That's a compliment in my sewer. So how my sewer sees a soul and a spirit. And by the way, when I first came out on my channel, what esoterica talks at length, at depth, at width about the soul. So some of the things that I was teaching, I was tone deaf, teaching that in a public arena. And so now I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. But in esoterica, the soul is many different things. So we can focus in on one full teaching where many mystery schools say you have to develop your soul. It's not a given. So then we go like, well, then what is this thing? What is this kernel of an I that we have, that we're brought into an incarnation with? So that's one way of looking at it. It's one where we can see us in a realm of sheer development. One where, yes, we come in with templates, or what we would consider like the pre-birth intentions, the karma, even the ancestral lineage. All of that adds into what we experience here as a fate or a predeterminism. But then through that predeterminism, we're meant to kind of like cultivate more and more soul, more and more essence. And that would be like the free will aspect, the one that I call Houdini in my poetry, because it's like, let's just go through this challenge. Let's go through this challenge. Let's go through this one. And the soul would be that kernel that goes to heaven or high hell. I will develop. I will learn, it becomes the alchemist in that case scenario. So that's how even more than one school of mysticism sees the soul. It sees as one that needs to be developed, and sometimes even, because they're no chill, sometimes even earned. Now, from an alchemical perspective, everything has 3 elements to it, possibly even a 4th if we want to get really deep. Those 3 elements are soul, spirit, and body. This applies to everything. So even if you were to go outside and pick a leaf itself would have a soul aspect of it, a spirit aspect of it, and a body. The body is the one that we're looking at. The body's known as soul. So from this larger, more inclusive perspective, everything has a soul. Everything has a soul. It would be the vessel in which something is animated. And what is the animating force would be spirit.
Yeah.
Kind of like chi or shakti would be the spirit aspect. It would be what brings something into life. So spirit is omnipresent. And so soul would be the uniqueness of a perspective, the uniqueness of a vessel. It would be more of a complex. And then it's like, what's filling that complex? What's giving it life, motion, animation would be the spirit. And so this even goes as far back as if we look at ancient Egypt. They would consider these 2 through the ka and the ba. Slight variation into Merkaba. That's not the same thing. That's a very parallel or adjacent definition. It's not the same. But the ka and the ba were considered the temporal and the eternal. And the eternal would be ka. It would be light or spirit. That's what ka would mean in this case. Ba would be the soul part. So like the soul is the thing that they had amulets and they had all these different technologies to kind of help navigate the afterlife. So it was like, what is that thing that's being navigated? It's the ba. It's the uniqueness of that essence, which would be soul. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. Thank you. You brought up Merkaba. Is that from that's Jewish, right? That's a Jewish term.
So actually, Merkaba was Egyptian first. But Judaism, all of Jewish mysticism is based off of Merkaba, and even more than that, Merkala or Hekala, Jewish ascent mysticism. And it was all based on the Merkaba, but that Merkaba was slightly different.
Yeah, I guess that was my question. I knew it was Egyptian, but did it transfer over to Judaism eventually?
Yeah. So in Judaism, what they were seeing was there's these ascent and descent into these palaces, which is what we would know today as dimensions. And I'm sure you've heard, because you're very well versed in, biblical, Gnostic, all of the ancient holy scriptures, about the mansion has many rooms.
Yeah. My Father's kingdom are many mansions.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. So that could also be looked at as dimensions as well. And so what they were doing was going through altered states of consciousness. You probably already know this, but for any of the audience that's tuning in and isn't aware of this, all of mysticism is based in one form or another in altered states of consciousness. Whether that's through breathing, whether that's through, just dance, or whether that's through other means, it's altered states of consciousness. So they were looking at literally thrones and seeing them as a Merkaba. And so that's also kind of like what we see about chariots inside ancient scripture. that was also Merkaba. That's how they were looking at it, as the chariot.
Yeah, thank you. Why did the Buddha say there is no self? I think that could be misunderstood by many Buddhists. I know Thich Nhat Hanh touches on that as well.
Yeah. The reason why he said there was no self is because that is a very powerful teaching for liberation. And I'm not the Buddha, and I even run into this. I'll be go into one dimension of a teaching because I find it to be a very powerful teaching, just what it is. But everything has way more than one dimension to it. And so when I learned about the no self the first time around, I took it all the way into that dimension, and I got lost because I was seeing it from the exoteric sphere of it. When I went around the second time, I was much more mature, I guess you could call it, in my consciousness. And I understood what he meant, like, completely. I was like, oh, there's no self. Because what he was teaching specifically in that is that we are an aggregate. And the emphasis was on the aggregate, even the 5 aggregates of senses. He even calls consciousness an aggregate. So the aggregates are very interesting, because once again, it's just a term that I understood, because if you understand what an aggregate is, then you get it. That could be seen in another dimension. We could look at aggregate and replace that term with egregor, which is, in esotericism, a collected manifestation of a thought form. So, but that wouldn't be precise. I just wanted to make that connection. That would not be a clear cut. Buddha didn't mean that. I was just trying to be creative. What he meant more so is that we're a social memory. The aggregates were social memories. Yeah. So when we're attached like flypaper to these different layers of a social memory, then he's like, you're just what you're calling yourself. So what he did to powerfully liberate a person like flypaper from those social memories was to go, there's no self. I love Buddhist teachings more than anyone's so far.
Wow. Yeah, he was deep. He's my favorite as well. He brought up egregores, and I always love learning about the term egregore. And I think I always want to learn more on that. So I'd love for you to touch on that, if you don't mind, a little bit more for us that never even heard of the term egregore.
Yeah, I mean, they're powerfully used in esoterica. And then I think they've like maybe brought them up in 2 or 3 different episodes within like the last 6 months, which is really interesting because I never used to really focus on them. But the egregores themselves can create even, beings behind that, like being, like, I don't like saying entity because it truly depends on what group is creating it. It could be an entity if one specific group has a very low frequency beliefs, a low frequency spiritual system, then the power that they are powering into the ether of that thought form could be one that I would call that entity, even though it's still an egregore. But if we look at it as like another one, I don't see egregores as sheerly negative. If we look at another egregore at a higher frequency, that collective belief system, that collective spiritual system can produce that thought form of that in more of the form of a being.
Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, I know that they can be positive and what we call negative, good or bad, or it's just interesting. So a collective, the more power it gives a certain beliefs, it creates this egregore, and they can feed off of that, right? These egregores, once they become an entity.
So this is the perfect point to clarify. It can become a feedback loop. Everything becomes a feedback loop at a certain time. That's why we're still to this day going chicken or the egg. because it's a feedback loop. And so because of that, the egregor then reinforces the very animation that it was given, and then it's fed that and stuff. So yeah, it can then definitely feed off of that, and it was fed into existence.
So it's basically like an entity attachment for an individual, but to the collective.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. I mean, so many people who are experiencing something, and there's positivity to sleep paralysis, but, one of my latest videos was on sleep paralysis.
Yeah.
And it was, just a collective asking. So some of my videos, all my videos are collective askings, but that one was a specific collective asking because people are dealing with that, and it's not positive experiences, even though sleep paralysis can lead to very positive, liberating experiences. Many people are going through that, and it's not positive experiences. Some of the time, not all of the time. The sleep paralysis experience is actually an interaction of some kind with an egregor.
Wow. Yeah, thank you. Going back to the soul, where do we go when we die? And why do we come back? I love to learn about that more and more. I know when I was a kid, I always felt like I remembered some past lives, future lives, but is everything happening in the now?
Yes, everything's happening at the now, but because we're chest deep inside time, we also have more than one truth going on at the same time. So that's what I call multidimensional. Multidimensional can sound very airy. It could sound like a word that you fill in a place when you don't know Jack from Joe. But to me, it gets really multidimensional, especially when for my job is to describe things that are not only one truth. And so because of that, what we could look at is like almost the highest truth, for the sake of highest at this moment, would be that there's no time. But then that should not negate the lower truths. So when we really evolve, we are not pitting truths against one another. We are simply navigating that there are larger, more eternal truths, and then temporal, and then using those, like harnessing one to paradoxically evolve higher than it, rather than pitting them, because that's just the cognitive dissonance of confusion. Have you ever heard that saying? I love it. I get railed every time we share it, and I still don't care because I love it. It is that, it's that the mystic swims in the same waters that the psychotic drowns. Joseph Campbell. I love it. I'm never going to stop sharing that quote. It is so true, because it helps somebody as long as they get over the fact that it's not politically correct. It will actually help someone, because how much of the time are we experiencing something, and it's a matter of us being able to understand that that's not a separate experience altogether from psychosis, but yet we can harness that into a higher one. So back to time. The lowest one would be like whatever dimension we're in. I mean, even lower than that would be like what I would consider densities. Some people navigate densities backwards and forwards. So like some people's one density would be highest. That's another person's lowest. So I'm going based off of densities from like 1 to 2, meaning the higher we go, the higher out of time we are. So based off of that, in the third density time, that's going to be operating way different. So what we're going to be experiencing here is like, yeah, we have one lifetime and it's going on. And then we die, and then we have another one. So it's going to look very much like that. And that's true. But then the higher truth above that, like middle management truth, would be, well, they're actually all happening simultaneously at a higher bandwidth of fifth density. They're simultaneous lives, but we're experiencing them when we submerge ourselves deeper into time as though they're completely separate lives that follow a chronological order. And then we could go even further from that. And then you go like, well, there's no time. So if you ever want to like quickly shut down a spiritual ego, or at least identify it, you could know if they're pitting. I'm not saying being in harmony, pitting the highest truth against the lowest ones. I see that a lot. I see people go like, well, there's no time. It's like, well, there's no time. You know, there's no, everything's happening all at once, but then there's still the nuance of being able to navigate all of this, navigate all of reality and the ultimate reality from a point that can help us. And if we just go to the highest truth all the time, that might not always help us.
Yeah, appreciate that. It's like we have all these people arguing, fighting, killing over what they believe is truth. I don't even know what truth is anymore. How do you define truth?
Whoever won. Just kidding. That's my latest mixtape. It's whoever won.
It's your hit single.
Okay, so actually, I have changed my mind this year about truth. I used to even go, I come from the aeon of truth. Like truth, it was my God. I just care the most about truth, you know? And so I see now how that's very noble, that has a lot of integrity, but I also now see the shadow side of that. And the shadow side of that is that it is definitive and securing some form of ability to fully understand reality. So why this is very important is because when it comes to the definition of truth, I now see truth as the ability to fully explore, become intimate with, and connect with a facet of the all, a dimension of the all, knowing that I can consume and receive that dimension of it to its maximum or capacity, but then beyond even that, I will still be left with another truth or a higher truth. And so now I know that there's even a multiplicity on truth. And, you know, we could go about that the wrong way. Sometimes we could be right for the wrong reasons, and we could be, you know, right for the right reasons, whatever that would mean. And so we could even look at that as a way to avoid or escape having to develop at all. So I see it more like being able to fully interact with whatever we see as objective, and that would be the truth. But once we're fully able to receive and interact with what is objective, aka what is truth, from there we have to not be weak enough to be able, because it's a weakness at that point, to be defined by that objectivity or be limited by it, or even think, see, we could go into inferiority about that, or we could go about superiority about that, or even think we know everything because of that truth.
You described yourself as a hyper multidimensional. What does that mean? And could you define and help describe what that looks like for you?
Yeah, so I said I was like hyper multidimensional.
In one of your videos.
Oh. Well, that's a lot to live up to. I must have had more coffee that day. I was hyper multidimensional.
Yeah, I was watching a video earlier, and I heard you say that. I'm like, I would love for her to describe that and how that looks for you inside. Take us to your inner world.
Oh, you want to go there? Hyper multidimensional. Yeah, because it's really hard to put into words when you're processing more than one piece of information at more than one place of dimension.
Huh.
So because of that, I mean, that's what I'm known for. I think out of everything, why I get my sewer belt, my title belt for my sewer, is basically for being able to articulate things that are mostly vague, abstract, or just kind of happening at too many places at once to be able to connect in a way that makes sense once you're verbalizing it. So that's probably what I meant by hyper multidimensional. It's my ability to kind of synthesize information.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. One of your videos I was watching, I think it's an awesome video. The secret purpose of fear. And then you said in the video on the thumbnail, they use it to control us. I would love for you to share about the secret purpose of fear and who are they that use it to control us?
Who are they? Who are they not? They, see, even that question, like there's layers to who they are. And a lot of the times the people who we see and we point to and we go, they are the they. They're like janitors to the they. So they're like the puppets, right? So, fear is the cheapest tactic ever. It's cheap. We sometimes think that because everything that we're learning about when we're awakening is overwhelming, just the nature of it's overwhelming, that somehow they're powerful. It's almost like just at this point, pushing a button of just fear. Like it's not sophisticated. We would be well on our way. We would be much more evolved if we weren't constantly succumbing to and purposely having fear induced, because how else can you control? In esotericism, fear relates to control. And you could take that even in your personal life. It doesn't have to be anything that a person is doing nasty to another. We could think of how anytime we've had some sort of trip, and like mental trip, and it was like, what produced any form of negative byproduct from that? It was a control. It was some form of control. And once we release, now you're more open. So our true nature is to be open. Our true nature is to not constantly be in a state of control, because that restricts. And so control's fine in a social setting, right? We don't want to just be like, but think of if we had no personal control over ourselves, that wouldn't be good either. So control's good to be able to have, but now take that and like multiply it by 1,000. Now you're too closed. You're too restricted. So basically this has many different facets. I'm talking about it right now as like a force, right? Like a reflexive force. But we can also take this same attribute of fear and now play it into our neurobiology, our neurochemistry, our nervous system and all. We're knocked out of our neocortex. We're knocked out of literally the ability to rationalize, to reason, higher order thinking capacities, the state to organize, to reflect, but also to be creative. So they're knocking us out of our creative power on purpose. How you knock a creator being, a sovereign being, out of their power so that then they're lending that creative energy, that creative power that they are to someone else's creation, you'd have to knock them out of their power. And at this level now, I'm talking about their power being their ability to have reason, rationale. these are things that people can maintain if they're evolved enough, even in the face of fear. But when you don't have people who know thyself or can even, kind of like become aware that this is happening or taking place, then that's when you have people that are blown like the wind about anything. It doesn't need to be a large storm. It could be somebody just blowing softly, and they'll still get thrown out because anything can take them out of their power. Any form of fear can make them go into their reptilian brain.
You brought up the neocortex, and that just got me thinking. Well, mind, body, spirit, neocortex, limbic system, or the emotional brain, and the cerebellum, or the subconscious mind. That when that goes out of harmony with it's easier to be controlled with fear, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's so funny because I keep up with mainstream psychology and physics, but just to see how far behind they are, to see how far they are. And it's an ego boost. Just kidding. And there's there was a campaign probably, I believe it was a year or two ago, about like trying to diminish the three brain theory, just like how I still have people trying to say there's no such thing as a left and right hemisphere. And it's like, it doesn't take much to really just kind of bend down to the knees of academia anytime they say, well, this doesn't really that. Well, this doesn't really that. Because, mysticism has the receipts. So there is a left and right hemisphere. There's a left and right part of the brain. Left-handed people, which I am, have a thicker corpus callosum, which integrates them. And that doesn't always mean, oh, it's better. It's not actually better. It's just thicker there, which can actually not be optimal. It just depends on what type of personality and what type of career you want to go into. So the fact that we can just be very, pushed over even whenever they say something like they call it the three brain theory. They can really just kind of like make anything sound like it's like, oh no, the three brain theory is like so out of date. No, there's a three brain theory for a reason. And there's compelling evidence that there's limbic system warfare done, just like how I emphasize on the neocortex warfare done. And, I actually have studied deeply the brain due to my own healing journey. And I could tell you just from my own sovereign gnosis of it, it is not absurd to dissect it into three different categories. But, yeah.
Yeah, and even in fear, you even bring up a trinity in fear. I think it's separation, division, and what was the other one? Constriction. Yeah, I was like, wow. I never even looked at it like that.
Yeah, that's probably what I meant also, to circle back to hyper multidimensional. Because when I'm saying that stuff, it's not like I read it in a book. Like when I'm saying something, it's being shown to me or just being known to me in a specific way that unpacks. It kind of like unfolds like that. So yeah, I probably could have even gone on further from those three.
That'd be a pretty cool documentary to do of you. And every time that stuff comes to you, it takes you into your inner world and see how it looks like.
Like John Malkovich and being John Malkovich. You just see me in a sewer like this.
A lot of fear is shown in politics, religion, and so on. And a lot of fear hovering over these big groups and people. And racism, how do you look at racism or when we're dehumanizing other types of people? Is that one of the deepest forms of fear we can have?
Yeah. Racism is the lowest hanging fruit out of all of the lowest hanging fruit. I would call it the lowest. So you can find compelling stereotypical evidence to be afraid of literally any race or ethnicity. And so to thrive off of that as a belief system in order to create some sort of superiority or separation, because that's what it does. Separation can be beautiful if it's done in a diversity through unity type of setting. If it's done in separation for superiority and inferiority, this is mainly what we see, that creates a dynamic that keeps escalating and building off of each other. And when you get that much escalation and that much building, what you have is victims who have now been forced. It doesn't matter what ethnicity. So I am not pointed at one ethnicity. Yeah. Anyone can take this and apply it to them. You have them forced to create some sort of superiority for why they are being this inferiorized. That's just what happens.
Do you think? Oh, no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So when you have like so many different types of like fires to put out from, so because it could be like, you know, in the States, I'm thinking of one that's very strong between races, but you could take that and combine it with anything and it just kind of fits. I've heard them all. I've heard all of them against each other, and it's the lowest hanging fruit, literally. I'm not kidding, because even things like sexuality or even things like that, you know, like they don't come absolutely first. What comes first is priming the consciousness for a superiority, inferiority setting through some sort of race. And because of that, you will have an environment where you feel either very afraid of others that are not whatever, like on your team. It's very tribal like that, and not the positive forms of tribalism. And then not. And so that is the largest form of us versus them mentality. That is a very low level of consciousness. All the different models you can take to clock consciousness, it doesn't matter if it's like David Hawkins' map of consciousness or biodynamics, whatever have you. Well, if you look at like the lowest bandwidths of consciousness, it will always have a hyper tribalism setting around themselves, like a superiority, like that us versus them mentality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, appreciate that. Which another video that I loved is Soul Lost, and then you said it produces spiritual amnesia. I'd love for you to touch on that since we're talking about fear.
Yeah, I would actually consider that, like, I know I'm known for many things like the timeline split or free will and what have you, but like, actually, I'm going to be doing after my first book more of an emphasis on this, because I really feel like this is a missing puzzle piece, and not just anyone, but one that I really want to help kind of like highlight. And that's because when I was looking into and learning Robert Monroe's work, which I'm a big fan of, he did not say it in these things at all, and he did not view them at all the way that I viewed them. He didn't view the shamanic way at all. He was very upfront about talking about how this was all born out of necessity. This was all born out of like, literally, I had this metaphysical fringe problem, but I was a high status individual, so I couldn't talk about it. So all of this stuff was done from that. And so because of that, I appreciate his gifts and his perspective and what he brought with it. But there wasn't the shamanic dimensions added. And there wasn't even a high emphasis on emotions added, even though he talked a lot about how much it can like affect your escape velocity. So when I went into his work, I started seeing his words and his beliefs, but through what I had already experienced. And there was just like a language barrier difference. I just saw it as that. I saw it as, no, what he calls escape velocity is what I call ascension. What he calls this is how I see this. And so for me, there was this big missing puzzle piece that it wasn't really a missing puzzle piece, but I saw that there was a gap in his work. And so what I saw was that gap is soul retrieval, which is induced when you need soul or when you have soul loss. So I see soul loss as being at the very core of our reason here, our journey, And it doesn't matter. Like, we don't have to subscribe to the same reason why we got that soul loss. This isn't like, when I'm talking about this, you can build your own beliefs around it. So this doesn't need to be powerless. Like, we're here because we're absolutely fragmented. We could look at it as, yeah, we're source. So we fragmented because we were bored.
Yeah.
And how you go into a small enough dimension, you can't even experience that as your own. So you'd have to fragment. That's a very powerful way of looking at it. And that can coexist right next to, like, you still need a heal. You still lack. You need a heal. And so whatever way a person wants to, like, pick this concept up and start playing with it, it's really about, at the basis of it, I believe that we are in a world where they're just symptoms, ailments of soul loss. It's not just at the root of physical manifestations or ailments. It's at the root of very toxic institutions, toxic dynamics in all scales: cultural, societal, interpersonal, interconnective types of dynamics. Like, it's like, if we wanted to know, why can't Earth have nice things, when it would be at the root of it soul loss? And so this doesn't take away any power to any type of, external problems. I'm not saying it's all us, we're at fault and everything, because once again, chicken or the egg, there's always an internal and an external dynamic. And it's never just one. We'd love to all think that the external negative forces are all why we can't have nice things, or sometimes we want to feel so much empowerment that we go like, no, it's all us. The only type of demons is the human mind. Those are cool. I've explored each extreme at depth. But once we're ready to kind of like start gaining a true integrative clarity, we're going to need to navigate them together.
Can we get to a point with that where we're just completely soulless people? Where like I have family members that are completely full-blown addicts, and they're just like a soulless person, the Walking Dead. Can we get to a point where we can't come back?
Yes. Okay, so this is where are you aware of the concept of non-player character?
I think I am, but just different terminology. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, you totally already know kind of like where I'm going with this because of Gnosticism.
Mm-hmm.
But what we would call like today, like NPCs. I didn't even know when I made that video. I just got a lot of people asking me about that. I didn't know that it was a political slur. One person in the comments was like, I think we should tell this lady where this originated from. So NPC is kind of like the modern version of when we look back at Gnosticism, what they were talking about when it was like this like matter-based consciousness, the lowest level consciousness, which is what I did a video on, the three groups of souls inside this matrix. But that's true. And it doesn't need to be a superiority on these concepts. Personally, I don't take the Gnostic viewpoints that I've learned and think that any superiority was behind those teachings. I think they were 100% rooted in discernment. And it can sound very superior, which is why I know that inflames people to hear these teachings. I think now in reflectiveness, I understand now how these really need to be taught in a full comprehensive way so that there's no superiority and that all of that's eradicated while we're learning about this. And so I get the hesitancy and the resistance behind trying to like come to terms with the fact that you could either be incarnated with less soul essence in a lifetime than another being. But then on top of that, who says that with free will, which is why I'm the largest advocate for free will, who says that everything stays whatever way. Everything is based off of a person's own ability to acknowledge their agency, even if it's not a lot, and then grow it. And so because of that, these are terms that are helpful and useful, especially when we're trying to navigate a world that looks soulless. But also, they're not defining precursors of a cemented fate. And so because of that, I do believe that people can gain more soul essence. And I do believe that they can reverse that process. They can completely go into deterioration of that as well. So what we're saying when we're talking about like, is there a soulless? Is many different things. A lot of the times what we're seeing is that that's where the things of dark triad attributes thrive. It's at a low level of soul essence. So whether that's psychopathy, now there's all these different terms. There's these different like garden varieties of sociopathy, which is like the extreme level of narcissism. So there's all these like different dark triad energies bred. And it's like, would you honestly say that that's like, oh, everyone has a very high capacity of soul essence. Even the ones that want to gain nourishment and pleasure from inflicting harm. So to me, this is about clarity. It's just about being able to understand this. It's not about being like, yeah, people who don't believe what I believe are less than me.
I appreciate that. How do you define essence?
That's a great question. So essence would be, to me, an intrinsic attribute of existence. So it's like, what's an intrinsic attribute of existence? Essence would be what essence would be what is most intrinsic. So it's like, what's intrinsic? Well, once you start saying what's intrinsic, it's like, why do we exist? There has to be something beyond even just our wish to experience, right? Like if we're coming now from like a very empowering type of belief system, like we're source, consciousness, power in a physical solidified vessel, then, well, why? And it would be like, to me, essence would be the hardest thing to really commune with, because it would be at the core of it all. Like, it's like, what's the multiverse? To me, essence and the multiverse go hand in hand in the most abstract concepts in all of reality, including esoterica. Because when you get to essence, if you look at it from Gurdjieff, because I came from the fourth way. So Gurdjieff talks about essence all the time. Talks about like developing essence, being able to take it in, how we have these different types of buffers that block us from our essence, that block us from absorbing it. So I'm not even really, when I'm talking about essence coming fully from his paradigm, just my own exploration of it is that essence would be what's most intrinsic in all of the multiverse. It's very likened to spirit, because if spirit is this like primordial Shakti animating force, then essence is also like up there in like being very closely related, or almost like a parallel concept to spirit. But I still see essence as, I still see like a nuanced difference in essence, because when I tune into it, it's like, it's not just a person's intrinsicness, right? It's not just a person's own nature. That would be the first level of essence. It would be like, who are you at your essential core? Above that, it would be, what is your local aspect of the multiverse? That would be like an essence. It would be like, where are you? Where were you intrinsically birthed from? in the void of source. Since to me at a higher level, because everything has a higher and a lower expression, at least the things I speak about, because of the microcosm and microcosm scale. So when I'm talking about essence in a way where it's like, what did she just say? I want to make this mean something to me. How this could mean something to someone is, as a person, essence would be, who are you really? If your willpower was not conditioned to show up in a certain way in the world, if you had no programming or conditions, who are you at your very core? And whatever we would find there would be considered a person's essence or nature. I was going too high with that because I like to tackle the complexities. So essence at that level is really what I see as an intrinsic attribute of existence, because it's like, once you've gone as far as you can with poking and prodding and trying to turn a particle, like zoom in on a particle and a particle of spirit to try to see what's behind that particle, what you'll find is that there's just this intrinsicness. It's just intrinsic. That's what I get to.
So in religion, you'll hear God is love. How would you take it to a step further?
God is oneness. At least that's how I would take that a step further. Because it's like, what is love? That could be a mini documentary. What is love? There's so many different dimensions of love that I could tune in all the way to, just like truth, and like give you my teaching on that exact dimension of love. Because love will mean so many things. But if I had to like go further than God is love, that's true. That could be God is order. That could mean many things, but God would be order, because order would be love in this case scenario. And that what I mean by order would be like, let's say I'm God and I said, I want to experience eating ice cream. Then God, me, would go, oh, you want to experience eating ice cream? Okay. And then I would go and be a human to eat ice cream. So I created some sort of order. Do you see that?
Yeah.
So I structured something to create order so that I can experience that. Why? Because it was love. So love creates order. That's one dimension. Another dimension of it is, like I said, love is oneness. In this case, it's the recognition of the ultimate truth that at the end of the day, the animating clay, the spirit that animates all of us is all of us. Yeah. There's nothing that is not God. Everything is one. Not just people are all one. Everything is one. And so because of that, I would find that to be a touch more kind of meta for God is love.
Yeah, thank you. So you think we can add maybe awareness behind love, to be aware of love?
Yes.
And with that awareness, it's oneness? Do you think? Just trying to...
Yeah. Okay, so in this case, it would be love is oneness, because it would be, I'm my brother's keeper.
Sure.
So it would be, I love you enough to make you aware. Why? Why do you love me enough to make me aware? I love you enough to make me aware because I'm you. So it's the recognition of oneness. And so to want well for others because you know that you're one with them, which is why empaths always feel bad. Can't stop feeling bad. You see a squirrel in the road and you're like, oh. So it's that ability to recognize even at a visceral level. Empathy is the recognition already of oneness. Yeah. Empaths just don't know it. Because the awareness is at a body level. It's not like at a cognitive level.
I was talking to Debbie Dashinger, and you've been on her podcast. Yeah. And during our conversation, I was wondering, like, can you bring in like a female collective trauma, and then you talk about the witch wound. We can bring in these from other lifetimes, past lives, or lives we were all having at one time. Like, I don't know how it all works. How does that affect us till to this day? The witch wound or female collective trauma, feminine collective trauma.
It affects people differently, but the two I see the most is fear of visibility. Like fear of visibility. And persecution.
I think the Catholic Church needs to take some responsibility and make some amends with this witch wound in some kind of way. At least acknowledge it.
I hope we need to stop at all, like, looking at the Vatican and the Catholic Church like they didn't just do everything that they just did. This is kind of insanity in front of us, how they get to, like, shine their shoes and have an ultimate rebrand.
You know, I know you have a strong connection with Catholicism, and I asked this to Matthew Fox, who wrote a lot on Christian mysticism, this question. And I says, why does it seem like the Catholicism has created some of the most dopest mystics and great minds in human history, in my opinion, versus regular Christianity? Because they've produced a lot of really good mystics. Is it because of their ability to be monks, practice finding their own path in a sense? Why do you think Catholicism has created some of the great mystics like Miser Eckhart or John of the Cross or Dorothy Day and so on?
Well, because they have, like, a monopoly, and everything that went off had to go off because it was an extreme. So it's kind of, this is going to sound crass, but even a clock that's not working is right twice a day. It's going to be right on the knot. It's going to be like,
you're right.
Oh my God, that is so right. That is so right. Okay, now let's, like, pretend that they didn't do all that. Like when you have that big of a you should produce 3 strong mystics with that big of a range of dominacy.
Yeah, they get condemned in their own religion at times.
Oh yeah, and then if you were too lit, they'll light you. So it's like, thanks, Catholic Church, for funding. Thank you for funding all of my research so you can burn me. That's another thing, the witch wound. That's probably why you brought it up.
Yeah.
But the witch wound also has a strong attack and binding on a person's internal intuition. This is men and women. It's their ability to directly connect with the divine, to directly experience the divine. Witch wound makes it feel like you're wrong. You're wrong, even to the point where it could sound like, oh, you're dark, you're Satan, all these different things come from the witch wound. So they can come from the archonic realm, or just, like, strong programming, whether it's religious programming. But even religious programming gets trickled down into the collective psyche in a way that the religion can have an obvious way of it showing up, but then also a very invisible way of it showing up. So it's really, the witch wound in general is the feminine consciousness being deeply persecuted to the point where it feels like it is wrong to either connect in that way with source, have that wisdom without a microscope or whatever, like have intuitive ability, or even just be in a position of, like, what I see is, like, I have a lot of clients who, and when the witch wound shows up in them, it's them wanting to teach. So it's them stepping into some form of visibility, which would also be their power. So it'd be a very reclaiming, not just for their ancestry and for their own soul's journey, but it's something where almost just the concept of being in a leadership or teacher position of those things gets very much targeted as being all these different things that would fall under a larger category of wrong or dark.
Diego de Landa, I think that was his name. He was one of the first bishops of Yucatan. He had a diary, and I can only imagine what they didn't put in his diary, but he talked about how he burned women. They burned women because they were too pretty. She was a virgin. We just wanted to burn them because of the fact that the other Spaniards were coming, so let's just get rid of them now, or they're going to be a problem later. Could that still be a part of the witch wound?
Hell yeah.
When I read that, I felt that really strong in me.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if I had some type of experience that in a different life.
Yeah. So the masculine and feminine consciousness have been at war.
Yeah.
And I don't really even see it. And I know it exists when it's in the body form, but I don't view it as being innately having to do with biology. I also see at this time a lot of very advanced men that have a lot of integrative masculine and feminine consciousness, and the same for women. So this is a very unique and interesting age because we're so much more awakened that you can't help but start integrating more of it. In fact, in alchemy, that would be considered like the thing that you do. Like the most progressive thing would be to acknowledge all of these different components of our consciousness that fall under a specific like force of gender. And so I'm not saying this at all in kind of like a way to fuel the flames of that.
Yeah.
But in advanced spiritualism, that same war that's going on in the world is not existing. Like women get the same opportunities as men get the same, like that's not going on at a higher spiritual level. I have a 50-50 audience of male and female. Okay. So, I'm very blessed for whatever, but, speaking to this at like a more third dimensional level, there's different themes that have been explored and one that's being healed. And we could do the same for the male consciousness and we could call it a different thing. And I'd love to give light to that. But for this specifically, this is a kind of storyline we're in where the feminine consciousness has really been hated. There's like a deep hatred. And so what I recently noticed, even just like the past 2 weeks, is that every single type of genre, you name it, if a person is a puny man, or if a person is a big Viking man, or if a woman is more feminine and more, let's say, physically attractive or beautiful, or if a woman is less, whatever it is, I want the audience right now to kind of fill in wherever they choose to like bring this issue up. And what I've noticed is that every single person, every single genre I just said, and beyond that, feels oppressed and victimized. And when I looked into it, because I care about truth, so I want to like see the most. I look into it. They're all right. And you'll all find evidence for all of them. So when I'm highlighting the witch wound, I definitely want to give that light and enhance it while not painting the whole story of this dimension as it being that. It's just one of the strongest themes that's going on. There's also themes, masculine consciousness and feminine consciousness fighting also has other things going on.
Yeah, thank you. Switching timelines, I'd love for you to expand on that if you don't mind. The quantum field of timelines, and are we switching timelines right now as a collective in humanity?
Yeah. So we have like individual personal timelines we're always surfing through, right? Those would be like our microcosm butterfly effect ones. It's like, oh, I was late here and stuff like that. Those aren't like collective timelines. Multidimensionality gets even more woo when it comes to timelines, more than anything else, because there's more than one version of Earth. And so when there's more than one version of Earth, now when we're going, what is a collective timeline? A collective timeline could literally be you just jumping onto a completely different version moving forward, right? Of Earth. Because what's even Earth? Like, it's a planet, right? Some of my audience would get mad that I said that, and I love them, but that's why I don't show that many Earth pictures, because I don't want to piss off a lot of my audience, because I love them. So it's like a... Okay, well, what's even that? It's like a dimension of consciousness that's in an archetypal realm called Earth, right? Archetypal meaning it would be a different arena than Mars. So Mars would be a different, kind of like in Edgar Casey's The Soul's Journey, talking about the whole solar system as a different school, each planet. So looking at that, it would be like archetypal powers. So Earth would have an archetypal power when we're experiencing it. But even within that, we have that almost like a cap. Like that's like, okay, you can't like experience like anything. But within this archetypal realm, you can explore, stretch the parameters of what it allows. So within that, when we're moving onto a completely different future that we're accessing, that would be like such a collective timeline shift that would be what I'm calling like another Earth. It wouldn't be that there's literally multiple Earths. It would be there's multiple Earths the same way you're changing a channel. You're not seeing 2,000 TVs, but there could be 2,000 channels. So the larger timelines would create kind of like, and many different channelers in this age have different ways of saying it. Sometimes it's just as easy. I like to break things down into nuts and bolts, right? But sometimes I've heard it just explained as like, how you feel is what you're tuning into, right? That's too easy for this sewer. So when it comes to like going on to shifting channels, if you will, or shifting onto a larger or a collective timeline that has a completely different trajectory for the future than another one, then even that is kind of like, there's even different increments. There we go. Like a weight, how there's increments. There's even different increments of that. And those increments are expressed even as timeline. What was the question?
I totally forgot the question. Oh, just breaking down different timelines, and are we shifting into a new timeline as a collective humanity?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So now that I broke all that down, so shifting into a new timeline for humanity would be when there is a strong curriculum. That's what there is no better way of describing it. Everything's lining up with curriculum. For instance, if many of us have healed, we're naturally integrating more of our consciousness, right? We can look at healing, like if we wanted to look at it from a more engineer's mind, we could look at it as consolidation. It's like, what's healing? Consolidation.
Okay.
So healing would be a more unified multiplicity, right? Because we're still multidimensional. Never going to get away from that. So it would just be the unity, the integration of that. And so I made a quote. It says that paradox is integrated duality. So healing would be actually no longer the division and the fragmentation of duality, It'd be once you've integrated that enough, and it's still paradox. So that's what I mean by like, we're still a multiplicity because we're multidimensional the whole way through. So once we have enough people who are going down a healing, it all comes back to healing, that will produce a different curriculum. Because what is healing? Like, it's pain that's been turned into wisdom, right? So if healing is like, oh, there was this pain, but now it's healed, do you still have to experience the same timeline, the same fates, the same realities? That's why healing gives you free will. And even free will can become complex. So I'm just saying these concepts in the context that it makes the most sense, right? Because I've made 3 different videos on free will, and I could make a 4th. So when I'm talking about free will now, I don't mean like, oh, you could do anything. You could float, you could levitate. I'm talking about free will, like you get to experience better quality of life. We're kind of lost in a lot of concepts. We're lost in a sea of concepts because we don't break them down enough to make them make sense to us personally first, and chew on that, and then like apply that to others through empathy, and then kind of like compare and contrast. So if a person starts a healthier diet, whatever healthy means to them, they're going to have a different experience. That's just like fact than eating junk food. So we accidentally, by being free will deniers, turn into spiritual communists. So now you take all that rant I just said and you amplify it, and it turns into a completely different time space because it's all acting out curriculum. It's like, wow, I get it. Like, we're all one. You shouldn't harm another. And now we're exploring that. But do we have to explore it at a very violent degree? No, we've probably already learned it at that degree. So a higher timeline doesn't mean like you're perfect. Nothing bad's going to happen. You're living in a utopia. None of that. It means that we've stabilized like the core ground rules of reality. It means like, hey, if I love you, I give you freedom, but you have to also be able to not invade my freedom for it to be true love. And then love is also awareness, and then love is also order, and then love is also oneness. So like, we still have karma. We still have experiences that are challenges because that's the lessons in light. Light will always have a shadow or a contrast, the ebb and flow. So we still have challenges, but we're not in a violent curriculum. So I'm really emphasizing this first before I just like point blank answer your question, because I want people to really understand just the basics of this and how this can be seen from a multidimensional level, but this could also be seen as a very like cause and effect. Like, hey, I made these powerful, really uncomfortable, but transformative choices in my life. And because of that, the universe helped me out. And now I'm experiencing better quality of life. When you start doing that, it like magic comes in. It's just naturally going to create an external reality where you're not experiencing your curriculum at a violent level. So that's why I liked how you already brought up fear and constriction, because that's what I see as the forces, if we're going to look at these as like forces, as being the major timelines. Because like I said, the other ones there's increments, right? Like there's increments of timelines. They're not like 1 and 2, a bad and a good. Instead, we're experiencing increments of these different future outcomes.
Okay.
And so when it comes to experiencing these different increments of these future outcomes, it's going to look slow. It's not going to look, oh my God, now we have free energy. It might look like a storyline building up to that free energy. And even if there's challenges in that storyline, even if there's challenges, we have already made a frequency set so that it has to play out to where there's free energy. It has to, and now we're just seeing the story of that unfold, but it's all really being generated by curriculum. which is why sometimes I sound like a stern teacher in my videos this year, talking about specific things like karma or natural law or these or that. But really it's because once we understand things of that curriculum, that's like the core. Then you person build your own adventure, pick whatever teachings you want from there. They're just all ways that now you're a decent person headed towards a positive trajectory.
So taking that to going back to a full circle, we often hear fear's our enemy. I love how you touched on one of your videos. You said at the root of all the issues we have in our reality, whether it be a personally or at a collective level, it's all the chaos and conflicts we're having is fear. But how do we utilize fear as a collective and as an individual to empower us instead of it being our enemy?
I can't think of a better example right now. So imagine sound levels on a soundboard. I'm trying to think of a more universal thing that people can envision. You need all of those sound levels. You don't just need the high ones. You might need to lower it too. And you might need to lower it. So fear is a part of the energy that creates all the sound levels on a soundboard or like on a microphone or whatever. Anything that somebody can picture that looks like some form of audio where there's like colored levels to it that are increased or decreased. So with that, if you strip away more of those audio levels, then what are you left with? A person who can get information from source directly will have full bandwidth range. Fear will be helping the audio levels, kind of like, just like how joy, just like how ecstasy, just like how neutrality, just like how objectivity, right? So if we look at fear as like the most empowered way to look at fear is you cannot come into such like interdependent experience, right? We're in our most humbling form, I think it's safe to say. You can't come into such like limited experience on purpose and then try to carve out of the entire equation and out of all of your experience and information fear. So I want people to experience when they're feeling fear, it's a part of a range of audio levels that they all need. And so it's information at that point. You see, it's information. So the more that we can actually like dissect fear as a way for us to gain information, it doesn't need to be the main thing. I'm not saying like a person should live and believe their fear. But if you could look at it as, oh, it's going to come in because when an audio level on a volume is peaking, it needs more range. So it's going to recruit more emotional, different temperaments or frequencies. So if fear is a low frequency, can you see how that can help? A low frequency can help maybe boost something because of it. So I don't know if any of that made sense, but basically how I view fear is I have acceptance of all of the different emotional temperaments because all of those, whether it's low, middle, high frequency states, are one, what I came here to integrate. So if we want to evolve, many people are doing that through like different methods, right? I view my way, I view it as like, it's all like, I'm going to integrate it all, right? If I chose to present myself as a certain way, I might attract certain people. If I choose to present myself through all of my audio levels, all of my frequencies, all of my humanness, all of my divinity, all of my ego, all of my higher self, that will help integrate things. That will also change who you attract. So I view fear as a core part of everything, not just what we're here to integrate, but also vital information, but also not against our point of attraction, but information included within our point of attraction.
So can that help our intuition a little bit?
That was actually the point blank way of what I said. It can help your intuition a lot. If the more that we're able to understand what information is behind fear, now our intuition isn't blocked. So sometimes a large question, which is very valid, is that my fear or my intuition? Have you ever heard that?
Yeah.
That's a great question. Is that my fear or my intuition? So fear is usually based off of data, the things we've experienced in the past. Intuition has a way of pulling from the past. So yeah, it could still be that, but also intuition is something that genuinely arises and sometimes can be even super precise when the person's not even thinking of something like that.
Yeah.
So they're like, whoa, that was weird. Intuition has things arise that aren't always attached to the past or past experiences, whatever they may be. So fear is a part of intuition. And the more a person tries to block off that, then they'll block off their intuition. While at the same time, they need to recognize that also fear can be mimicking a person's intuition.
Yeah.
And so this would be where to know the difference is wisdom. Isn't that in the Serenity Prayer?
Yeah. The wisdom to know the difference, yep.
We're just going to say that was actually an ancient Gnostic text and they took it. Because, that's beautiful. And the wisdom to know the difference. What I can control, what I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference. What is fear? Control.
You're going to have to show me that text. I love it. Yeah. Send that.
It's a text in my mind.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. I really do. And I love learning from you. There's always different levels when you're explaining something. So that's why I said I have to re-listen to it because I love that about your teachings. So I really appreciate it.
Well, I really appreciate you because when I feel safe, I'm able to go really abstract. So I hope your audience appreciates this and got something out of it. But I was just having fun exploring these things because I know with you, and you're such, a high consciousness individual, that I'm able to do that. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm going to end it with the Rumi quote, the great Sufi, right? When you focus on their outward form, you will see only differences between the Muslim, the Christian, and the Jew. Why not zoom in on the inner light that they all share? I appreciate you. Thanks for coming on.
Rumi stole my career.
Namastizzle.
Just know we out here. Know we out here working in a major way. Had to speak on it just to make a play. Any given subject, know we make a way. Time to level up on a day-to-day. Know we out here working for the greater good. Expand your mind, broaden your lens the way you should. From the stars to the galaxy to speak on spirituality. Higher understanding for the neighborhood.